On a hot summer morning, John decided to take a short vacation and went to a quiet and picturesque lake, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city and work. Upon arriving, John set up his tent by the shore and built a campfire. The first day was wonderful. He swam, sunbathed, and fished. In the evening, enjoying the silence, he grilled freshly caught fish over the fire and thought about how he hadn't felt this peaceful and free in a long time. The second day was just as pleasant. John strolled around the surroundings, discovered many scenic spots, and even found a small waterfall. Returning to his tent, he spent his time reading and fishing again. It seemed nothing could ruin his vacation. But on the third day, everything changed. In the evening, as the sun was setting, John decided to sit by the shore and enjoy the last rays of sunlight. The water was calm, and only occasionally a light breeze created ripples on the surface. Lost in his thoughts, John suddenly noticed some movement on the opposite shore. At first, he thought it was a fish or some animal, but then he saw that it was a person. The man was standing right at the water's edge and looked strange. His movements were slow and unnatural, as if he was struggling against some invisible force. John squinted, trying to understand what was happening, and suddenly saw the man slowly walk into the lake. He walked straight into the water, as if obeying an invisible command. When the water reached the man's waist, John jumped up and ran to the shore, hoping to help. But the man kept sinking deeper, and soon only his head remained above the water. John managed to catch a glimpse of his eyes. They were full of horror and pleading for help. Without hesitation, John waded into the water up to his ankles, trying to reach the drowning man. The cold water stung his legs, but he ignored it. The man was almost completely submerged, and only his hands were still visible above the surface. John stretched out his hand, trying to grab one of the man's hands, but suddenly he felt something grab his leg. It felt like a hand, but it was cold and hard as steel. Panic seized John. He jerked, trying to break free, but the grip was too strong. He looked down and saw something dark and unclear rising from the water. It looked like a human hand but with a strange sheen. John kicked his leg with all his might, and finally, he managed to break free. He scrambled to the shore and ran to his car without looking back. The engine roared, and the car sped away. Only after driving a significant distance did John stop to catch his breath. He sat in the car, breathing heavily, and looked at his ankle. There was a strange mark, resembling a handprint, but it didn't look like a regular bruise. The mark was dark and strangely shimmering. John tried to rub it off, but it wouldn't disappear. Weeks passed, but the mark didn't fade. John went to a doctor, who simply shrugged and said it was a regular bruise and should go away. But the mark didn't go away. It remained on his ankle, reminding him of that terrible evening. John tried not to think about what had happened, but every time he looked at the mark, he remembered that ominous evening and the force that tried to pull him into the lake's depths. Several months passed. John returned to his usual life, but the memories of that evening haunted him. He spent more time at home, avoiding nature and bodies of water. The mark on his ankle still didn't disappear. It reminded him of what had happened, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. One day, while examining the mark again, John noticed that it had changed. It had become darker and more defined. Now it was not just a vague imprint but a clear outline of a hand. John felt a chill run down his spine and realized it was not just a bruise. It was something more, something that came from the depths of the lake, John decided to return to the lake to understand what was happening. He packed his things and drove to the place where the strange incident had occurred. Upon arriving, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Everything was just as it had been that evening, quiet, peaceful, but with an elusive tension in the air. John approached the water and stared into its dark surface. Nothing happened, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He stood by the shore, waiting for something unusual to happen. And suddenly, a hand emerged from the depths of the lake. It was exactly like the one that had grabbed him that evening. The hand slowly reached towards him, as if inviting him back into the water. John took a step back, but the hand didn't disappear. It kept reaching for him, and he felt the cold seep into his body. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The hand drew closer, and he realized it was not just a ghost or a vision. It was a real threat. At the last moment, when the hand was almost touching him, John mustered all his strength and ran. He ran to his car without looking back. The engine roared, and he sped away, trying to leave the place as quickly as possible. Returning home, John realized that the mark on his ankle had disappeared. But the fear and horror he had experienced stayed with him forever. He never returned to that lake and avoided any bodies of water. But the memory of that ominous evening and the hand reaching from the depths never faded. John knew it was not just his imagination. And every time he remembered it, he felt the cold seeping into his soul.